Good morning, dear colleagues and guests, and good morning to all of those who follow us online. Thank you for having joined, and welcome to this session, which will be about the impacts of an EU positive list for pets, which is a priority to achieve during this term. In 2022, the European Parliament addressed this issue in a resolution, but we still need a legislative proposal from the European Commission. A positive list includes animal species that can be held as pets. Experts will determine which animals are safe and suitable based on a comprehensive risk assessment that considers animal health and welfare, and public health and welfare, and also species conservation. All animal species not included in the positive list won't be allowed to be traded or kept as pets by private owners. Several member states have already introduced a positive list. It started off as a pilot project, but it soon turned out to be an obvious choice for regulating the incredibly complex exotic pet trade and keeping regime. The exotic trade has recognized welfare issues, and various veterinary opinions highlighted that poor husbandry is one of the most common issues. On human health and safety, an animal rescue center in the Netherlands demonstrated that 1 in 7 mammals rescued from the exotic pet trade harbored potential zoonotic diseases. Invasive alien species, furthermore, often originate from exotic pet trade. In many European cities, you can see green flashes and squawking of the parakeets, and these parakeets have been held as pets but have been released, and now they are outside in our nature. And we also see the slider turtles present in our local ponds that are not natural here in our environment but have been imported as pets. The exotic pet trade raises conservation concerns because new species can threaten the original population, and you see population reductions in already very rare species. All these issues and more are a result of the current exotic pet trade rules in the European Union. Today we will hear from Nick Clark, Wild Animals Program Leader at the Eurogroup for Animals. Welcome, Nick. He will justify why the dogs and cats proposal needs to include a positive list for pets. Then, Griffin Carpenter, an independent economist with a long background in economic and policy impact assessment, will share how a positive list could mitigate the cost of the pet trade, while having a smaller effect on stakeholders than one might expect. So that's the program for today, and I have a couple of practical aspects that I will just mention. The meeting is streamed in Interactio live. It will be recorded also, the meeting, and the video recording and presentations will be uploaded on the Intergroup webpage. Interpretation is provided for English, French, German, Italian, and Polish. So I have a couple of announcements before we kick off today's program. There's an oral question on the Commission's plans to include the revision of the still outstanding legislative proposals on animal welfare in their work program for 2025. We have organized this oral question here in the Intergroup, and I'm glad to inform you that thanks to your help and the joint effort earlier this month, I was able to table the oral question on the Commission's plans to include the revision of the outstanding legislative proposals in its work program for 2025. So now we need to make sure that this oral question turns into a plenary debate, ideally in the December session, and the debate should be winded up with a motion for a resolution. So we need some cross-party support for this initiative. It's the Conference of Presidents who take a decision on this, so if you can influence your president of your group to support it, it would be good. So I encourage you to do that. We have now 90 members of the intergroup from almost all political groups and 21 member states. And you can still join, of course, and you can do so by registering at the intergroup's webpage or by contacting me or the secretariat of the Eurogroup for Animals. If your group has not taken a decision on which intergroup to support, I encourage you to continue promoting the re-establishment of the Animal Welfare Intergroup. We need more support from the political groups, so please, if you can do something to influence your group's decision, it will be very important, and you can also speak with me afterwards on this issue. We're working on this right now. Good. Then the presentations. I will kick off the program, and as mentioned, the first speaker, Nicholas Clark, Wild Animals Program leader at the Eurogroup for Animals. He will tell us more about the added value and feasibility of an EU positive list for pets and why companion animal protection should go beyond dogs and cats. Nicholas, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much. We'll just wait for the presentation. Wonderful. Well, we're here now, and we have a chance today, now, in the upcoming couple of months, to change the way pets are kept and traded in the EU, to go from a system of dominance over wild animals to one more aligned with stewardship of nature. And the way to do that is through an EU-wide positive list. So I'm here today to call on the Parliament to empower the Commission to change this system. And let's not miss this opportunity of the dogs and cats proposal. We can fight for an empowerment through tertiary legislation for the Commission to establish an EU-wide positive list of allowed pets or allowed companion animals, depending on how we want to refer to them. Now, by the end of this session, my aim is to demonstrate to you exactly why this belongs in the cats and dogs proposal, or dogs and cats proposal, depending on if you're a cat person or a dog person, I think. And that's right. And of course, I'm going to show you the justifications for why. But first, what is a positive list? So simply speaking, a positive list is a list of animal species that are allowed to be traded and kept as companion animals. So this would mean that if a species is not on the list, it is automatically not allowed to be kept by everyday people. Now, I'm going to explain a couple of nuances later on that allow this to be a proportional tool. Oh, the image has shifted, but you can forgive the image. Let's be clear. People that keep exotic pets are not bad people. What's not correct is the current system which allows species which are not suitable to be kept in the home to be kept. Now, I have plenty of people in my life, plenty of close friends, people who I respect, who either do or have kept exotic pets in the past. So, for example, a friend of mine, an IT specialist, he used to tell me, he used to light up when he told me about his sugar glider, that he would come home and when he'd let the sugar glider out of the cage, it would fly across the room onto his arm. And he said, it loves me so much. But he never talked about the fact that this sugar glider spent 95% of its life alone in a cage. And this is a social animal. Now, this was not his sugar glider, but many sugar gliders suffer from self-mutilation due to boredom and stress when they're in people's homes. Just one of many examples. This image has also shifted around, but it is a turtle. I have another very close friend of mine who's a PhD scientist who keeps two turtles in his house. And, you know, turtles are advertised as being easy to keep animals. It's not the case, by the way. But even my friend who follows all the rules, he knows what he's doing, one of his turtles has escaped twice because these are curious animals. They really want to explore their environment. But of course, they are not adapted for life in an apartment building, and his pet has twice fallen off the balcony and broken its shell, had to have surgery. And you can see, well, this image is also flipped around, I see, but you can see how these animals are actually sold when they're either sold online or through markets or pet shops. It's terrible conditions for these animals. So I have a challenge today. My challenge today is to justify to you why we should go beyond cats and dogs in this proposal. And what better way to do this than to take the justification that the European Commission used to make a cats and dogs proposal, dogs and cats proposal. So I'm going to take the explanatory memorandum that they've used, and I'm going to demonstrate to you exactly why exotic pets should have been included. And what I want you to do while I'm speaking is have a think, and think, why on earth did the author of this not automatically include exotic animals? So we have the Eurobarometer. This is, again, from the cats and dogs proposal justification, where it says that 74% of European citizens consider that the welfare of companion animals should be better protected than it is now. Well, in a survey of 6 member states with over 1,000 people in each member state, 92% of people thought that the trade of exotic pets should be better regulated, and 88% of those thought this should be done by the European Union because of the free movement of goods on the common market. The memorandum speaks about the huge number of dogs and cats in the European Union. Well, in fact, trade numbers and keeping numbers of exotic pets are extremely hard to come by. As Niels mentioned at the beginning, this trade is extremely complex and it's unregulated at EU level at the moment. But what we do have is some FEDIAF data, where they talk about 30 million small mammals, 52 million ornamental birds, 23 million aquaria, and this 12 million terraria, this doesn't mean that there's 12 million reptiles, because in one terraria you can get many reptiles or many amphibians. And in fact, we are doing research right now where we're estimating around 13 million reptiles in Germany alone. A really staggering number. Let's talk trade very quickly. It was demonstrated that between 2004 and 2014, over 20 million live reptiles were imported into the EU. Now, I've done my own research on traces data, where I can demonstrate that 14 million live reptiles for the purpose code of pets were imported into the EU over a 16-year period. Now, we have over 2,000 species currently in trade in the European Union. Each of these species has its own needs and its own motivations for behaving in certain ways. And many of them are unsuitable to be kept as pets. But 2,000 different species. How can we have proper guidelines for those kinds of numbers? So let's go back to the memorandum. The dogs and cats proposal says that the demand for dogs and cats is met by licensed breeders, but there is still illegal trade and transportation. Well, we know that captive breeding of wild animals is a huge deal in the EU, even bigger than the imports. We are a captive breeding society at the moment, and animals are captive bred and then sold all over the European Union and, in fact, exported across the world as well. But we have no registration or no systematic registration of the breeders. We have no systematic data collection. We have absolutely no idea which species are being bred, how many animals of each species are being bred by different people. It's done in people's basements, in their homes, in their garages. And we have no idea of the welfare that's going on within these breeding facilities. The little information we do have does not spell good news for those poor animals. Now, talking about illegal trade, a fantastic paper called Stolen Wildlife demonstrates numerous examples of animals being illegally smuggled from their country of origin, where it's illegal to take them from their country of origin. Once they arrive in the European Union, they are legally traded because we simply don't have the rules to deal with that. Again, the dogs and cats memorandum explains about the document forgeries and misleading information. Well, let's hear from the experts. Europol. Well, Europol have stated that numerous exotic animals are falsely labelled as captive bred in CITES document forgeries. This is a big problem. And an investigation from LAV a few years ago investigated 2,000 online adverts. Now, these were CITES-listed species, and 62% of those adverts, there was no mention of any documentation at all. That, again, is a big problem. The Dogs and Cats explanatory memorandum talks about the online platforms and that it's increasingly growing, the selling through online platforms and social media. And many of these are not from responsible breeders. Well, I've mentioned already the issue with breeders. What does a responsible breeder mean for exotic animals when we have no guidelines? We have no idea what's going on. There's no common rules. And we don't even know how many breeders there are. Anybody could be doing it. And online trade, we have plenty of investigations demonstrating that most exotic animals are sold online. So this is also a problem for the exotic pet trade. Now, this causes huge welfare considerations in the online trade, in the keeping of animals, and throughout the trade chain. And for your observation, there is plenty of examples sitting on the desk over there of different species that are suffering in trade. The memorandum talks about transmission of zoonoses, so diseases that pass from animals to humans, excuse me. Now, it's well known that wild animals are a source of zoonoses. We've had the recent pandemics to testify to that. There's no question there. But just a quick bit of evidence that Niels touched on in his opening remarks. Animal Advocacy and Protection, a very important rescue centre in the Netherlands, sampled 262 exotic pets rescued, and 1 in every 7 exotic pets carried a zoonotic agent. And a quick anecdote from one of these animals, this leopard cat, the owner indicated that it had had its vaccinations. It was disease-free. But during the quarantine period, pathogen tests were done, and unbeknownst to the owner, several bacterial agents were found, some of which can be extremely harmful to humans. This is somebody that thought their pet was disease-free. So let's change tack slightly, and let's talk about the laws. Now, again, this is in the justification for the Dogs and Cats proposal. And it states that the Commission has identified divergent national rules on the breeding of dogs and cats in the Union. Well, here's a quick map. You can find this map in this white paper here. This is updated. There's some over there as well. These are the current positive lists in the EU, and some positive lists that are in discussion, and some positive lists that are enshrined into law. But also you'll notice that the white member states, they have a conglomeration or a mixture of different negative lists, of different lists of species, and some countries have no rules or regulations at all. Talk about divergent national rules. It's mind-blowing. The memorandum also talks about institutional support for introducing common EU legislation. Well, what institutional support do we have for a positive list? In the 2016 CITES resolution, the Parliament called on EU member states to establish a positive list of exotic animals. In 2021, in the European Biodiversity Strategy resolution, it was proposed that EU-wide white lists, which are also positive lists, of specimens permitted for import, keeping, breeding and trade as pets was established on the basis of scientific risk assessment, as any positive list would be. So here, there's also, we had a council support for a study on the added value and feasibility of an EU-wide positive list. And as Niels mentioned, in 2022, we had another parliamentary resolution. Now that study is currently happening right now. And it won't be finished until at least the middle of next year. And what does that mean? Because the Cats and Dogs proposal, Dogs and Cats proposal, is being discussed now. What we need to include this empowerment for a positive list so that there is a legislative pathway forwards for a positive list once that feasibility study demonstrates the added value and feasibility of a positive list. We cannot wait. I love this one. The memorandum states that there is no EU legislation on the welfare of dogs and cats. Well, where is the EU legislation on the welfare of exotic pets? It's totally non-existent. We have plenty of pieces of regulation that touch upon exotic pets, but none that talk about their welfare. And the positive list fills that puzzle piece perfectly. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I will be really, really quick. I'll skip these slides, but you can see them later on. Just to say that the positive list also fully aligns with current regulations. You can ask me questions on that if you wish. And the legal basis. The legal basis for the Cats and Dogs Regulation, Article 43 and 114, touches upon the breeding, keeping and trade with the objective to ensure smooth functioning of the internal market. Well, we have a legal opinion from Fratini Vergano demonstrating that under Article 114, this is very feasible as long as the improvements in conditions for the functioning of the internal market are the main purpose, which is what they would be here. We abide by the subsidiarity principle. I won't go into details here, but just to keep it short, we have some positive lists in the EU, but you can actually just go to a neighboring country where the laws are more lax, you can buy an animal there and you can bring it back, undermining the rules of member states. An EU-wide positive list would very much help in that cause. And finally, in terms of proportionality, this is what I said at the beginning. A positive list is not a blanket ban. It is a flexible, proportional tool. In the existing positive lists within the EU, you have possibilities for listing and delisting. You have the possibilities for certified keepers, if they are able to demonstrate their true expertise, that they have the time, the expertise, and the equipment to be able to do it. That will be very few people. And there is a grandfather clause, which I can go into more details later. So I call upon you again to push for an empowerment, to empower the Commission through this dogs and cats proposal to create a positive list for companion animals. The justifications speak for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicholas. I think that was very clear. And we've seen that the Parliament and other institutions have called for this positive list for numerous times. And we now have an opportunity to actually make it happen in the dogs and cats proposal. If there are any urgent or pressing questions for Nicholas, you can put them forward. Otherwise, I suggest we go to our second speaker and then we can discuss afterwards. So in that case, I would like to welcome Griffin Carpenter, independent economist. She will join us online and she will speak about a single market for the a single list for the single market. Sorry, Griffin, I said that you were a woman. Obviously, you're not. But a single list for the single market. You'll be speaking about that and assessing the impacts of an EU positive list for pets. Dear Mr. Carpenter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Griffin Carpenter. I'm an environmental economist specializing in impact assessments of public policy. And today I'll be speaking about a new study, the title's on the screen in front of you, analyzing the impacts of a potential EU positive list for pets. Slide. So the focus of the study is on the impact. It's not on the political dynamic, legal feasibility. I think Nick's covered that very well. So it's just on the impacts of what a potential list would have on economics, on public health, on conservation, etc. The focus of the study is primarily on mammals and reptiles. That's because existing positive lists have focus on these animal classes, and amphibians secondarily. This is also because market data is easier to come by for these animal classes. And the draft report is complete, so I'm happy to present some numbers today. and the study will be published online in early 2025 from myself and my co-author, Francisco Aguayo. In this presentation, I'll be mentioning existing positive lists quite a bit. So here's that list in front of you. You can see on the left, mammals is the most common animal class in these positive lists. Belgium was the first country in 2009. Now it's split by region. Cyprus, Lithuania, Luxembourg, and Netherlands are other positive lists for mammals. And on the right, you see for reptiles. So that's just in the 3 Belgian regions, but each one has their own list. So it's 3 independent lists. Not a huge sample size of positive lists to learn from, but it is the direction of travel. So if we went back to 2017, this table would basically be empty. Slide. The study is separated into 2 different methodologies. So the first bit is kind of economic modeling, crystal ball, looking to the future. What do we estimate the impacts of a potential EU positive list would be? We do this through scenario analysis, and there's 2 scenarios. One that's a long list, more permissive about what species could be kept as pets. The second scenario is a short list, so more restrictive. And how those lists were formed was looking at those existing positive lists in different member states and saying, well, for a long list, if a species is on a positive list in any of those countries, then it goes on that longer list. The short list says only if a species is on the positive list in every member state. So you could think about it in terms of member states negotiating about what species are on the list, and if any member state would suggest an animal, okay, that goes on the long list. You're not allowed to say no. Everything goes on. The short list would only be if there was consensus. If every single member state said, agreed, that goes on the positive list. A couple examples. When we're doing this scenario analysis, a hedgehog, for example, is not found on any positive list. All those 7 examples did not include it, so it's not allowed on the market in this future modeling. A guinea pig is the opposite. It's found on every positive list in Netherlands, in Cyprus, in Lithuania, etc. So that goes on the short list, and then that goes on the long list. The short list would only be if it's found in each case. A chinchilla, for example, is on some lists, but not others. It's allowed in Cyprus and Lithuania, not in the Netherlands. So with these list scenarios, we can apply that to market data and see how the market would have to change in the future, which species would no longer be allowed because of these positive list scenarios. And then with that change in which species are on the market, we can assess how that would change the amount of threatened species that are traded, invasive alien species, etc. Okay, so that's the first part. The second part is looking at the past. What's been the experience in member states that do have existing positive lists? How has trade changed? How have the number of pet shops or pet traders changed? What's the experience of stakeholders in those countries? So, like the study, this presentation will be split in 2. Slide. So just a quick overview of the exotic pet market. When we use the term exotic, it means animals not cats and dogs, rabbits or ferrets. As Nick said, no great numbers here. Our estimate is for these 3 animal classes, mammals, besides the ones I mentioned, reptiles and amphibians have about 22 million. If you include birds, it's up to 60 million. But the numbers are uncertain, but certainly large. Although we use the term exotic, they're actually very common in the EU market. And what we can see is that it's highly concentrated as a market. So although thousands of species are traded, some are much more commonly traded than others. So on the graph to the right, you can see that if you look at the top 10% of species found on the market, they represent, depending on the animal class, 75% of that. So 10% of reptiles that are traded are 75% of the market. And this is critical when we get to the next slide on economic importance. I promise this graph on the right is the most complicated in the presentation. This is applying the positive list scenarios, which again are based on positive lists that exist in different member states. And the blue dots are animals that are on the positive list, meaning they can continue to be traded and kept as pets. The yellow dots were species on the market, excuse me, that would no longer be allowed to be traded. And what we see is that on the left of the graph, so those are the species that are more commonly traded. Pythons, a ball python would be the most common. That's the first dot, representing 18% of the market. Those dots on the left are more likely to be listed, whereas the species on the right are unlisted. So positive lists tend to allow trade in species that are already present in the market in large numbers. And what this means in terms of economic impacts is that although positive lists disallow the trade in 60 to 70%, depending on that short or long list scenario, 60 to 70% of species would no longer be traded. The actual numbers of animals is only down 20 to 30%. So the market share, the potential revenue of businesses is down more 20 to 30%. And that's assuming no change in behavior. We'll touch on this later, but of course businesses will shift their practices from species that are no longer listed, unlisted species, to species that are listed. Slide. In terms of conservation impacts, if we look at the market currently, a quarter of species that are traded are from threatened populations. Now, by reducing trade, you see the numbers at the bottom. A positive list also reduces the trade in threatened species. By number of species, about 70%. Slide. Biodiversity. So we measure this in terms of invasive alien species. One potential outbreak could have catastrophic costs. And what we see is that an EU positive list reduces those impacts, but not as much as, say, the conservation impacts or indeed the economic impacts. And this could have two reasons. One, that the invasive alien species impacts aren't considered in the positive lists that already exist in the market, and that the number of species that have identified invasive alien species risk is quite small. Slide. In terms of public health, the mechanism is the same. Fewer traded species, lower impacts. And we find that zoonotic risk is highest for two groups, for mammals and for imported species. Again, an EU positive list, by reducing trade, reduces the viral load and potential zoonotic risk. Now, next slide. So that's our modeling on how these positive list scenarios would impact different impacts in the future. Now, what's been the experience of the 7 examples of positive lists in EU? Slide. So the main methodology we used here was taking a survey of 55 stakeholders that are involved in the trade or keeping of exotic pets. You can see different stakeholder groups there. And what we find when we ask them about a couple different themes are on the efficacy of the existing list, the effects, and their views on harmonization or an EU list. So first, looking at efficacy here, if we just focus on the top right, this is all the stakeholder groups put together. A slight majority say that the positive list is working to some degree. Some a large degree, a moderate degree, or a small degree, and some saying it's not working at all. You can see the results vary by stakeholder group. So law enforcement were more positive, saying that it is working. Breeders and wholesalers saying that it's not working. So there is some red overall, slight majority for green. So what's going on with the red? Next slide. So if we asked reasons for the responses, stakeholders say that there's a problem with illegal trade, particularly online trade, is undermining the positive list in their member state, and cross-border trade. So the third example there in Wallonia saying if individuals or shops can't get a certain pet because of the positive list in Wallonia, well, they go to Netherlands, they go to Germany. So the national positive lists are undermined by having a common market there. Slide. We also asked the pet shops, which were 24 in our sample, were there products you previously offered but no longer offer because of the positive list? And the majority here, 14 of the 24, said that there were products. So different types of pythons, Burmese python, for example, reticulated python were mentioned, sugar gliders, which are not on most of the positive lists, and different feed products, so kangaroo feed, frozen rabbits. Because of the positive list, they had to shift to other species. Slide. Now on the effects of the positive list. So we asked the different stakeholders.
Griffin,
Yes.
if you could, we're coming to an end soon, so if you could take that into account. Thank you.
So we asked, did the positive list affect you in a positive, negative, or neutral way? And how strong was that effect, large, moderate, or small? And we can see the most common response is actually not at all. So a pet shop, a wholesaler, a veterinary clinic saying either not at all in gray, neutral in yellow. There's a bit more red than green, negative than positive. Of course, it's also important to say these stakeholder groups are involved in the business of animal trade as opposed to public health groups, environmental welfare groups, etc. Slide. And just looking at some of the market data, which is hard to come by, but we can see that since Belgium's had its positive list in 2009, the number of mammals, the number of small mammals, so besides cats and dogs, that are recorded in the country has actually been pretty constant. So the positive list in Belgium hasn't seemed to have an effect on the number of pets, just the types of pets. A move away from sugar gliders towards other species that are on the positive list. For reptiles, there appears to be a slight decline compared to other animal classes, but the effect is rather small, so a decline of 22 rather than 19. Lastly, we asked about their views on harmonization. And this was really interesting because most of the survey respondents, even if they were saying they were negatively affected, even if they were skeptical about the existing positive lists, supported an EU-wide list. So across all these stakeholder groups, we see them saying that an EU positive list would help to a large, moderate, or small degree. And one of the comments that was coming out largely is that this cross-border trade was undermining the existence of national lists. So they thought it was much easier and more fair to have an EU list because their competitors in different countries were going by a different list. Slide. You can see some of the quotes there. And
Griffin,
that's the last slide.
are you concluding? That would be
Yes.
good. Thank you.
Last slide. So the final observations, we have a concentrated pet market, which reduces the economic impacts. Stakeholders had mixed views, but clearly supported harmonization as helping their businesses. And there's a need for complementary policy, that this is not the only policy relevant to exotic pets, but it provides the framework that we can build from.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Carpenter. And I think that gives some food for thought also when it comes to the opinions in the member states and for traders on this idea of a positive list. I would now like to open up the floor. We have also new MEPs coming in, and you might not have heard all the discussion here, but if anyone would like to comment or have questions, you're most welcome. I could perhaps start off. I have a couple of questions, and so my question is about if you introduce such a positive list, and that's perhaps for both of our speakers. Have you any ideas of or given any thought to which kind of timeline we're looking at? Because I suppose you need to give some time for this to happen, and also. Also, I would like to ask Mr. Carpenter. You say that actually many are positive, have a positive opinion towards the EU positive list. But when the national positive lists were introduced, could it give some controversy? Did it spark a big debate? I know in my own country, Denmark, we have a law on dogs, which kind of dogs you're allowed to have and which you are not allowed to have, and that has been a very controversial thing because, of course, as you say, Nick, the people who have these pets, they love them, so they might not be thrilled about not being able to have them anymore. So that would be my questions. I don't know if there are any further questions. Seal,
Yeah, I will just jump in and with two political perspectives. I think one of them is that it's important that we use the momentum that is now after in this new mandate and with a commissioner responsible for animal welfare as well to really try to build upon. I have the feeling that some of the member states are also not acting on their own because they are awaiting EU legislation on this matter. So in order to not drag the timing for too long, I think it's important to use the momentum there is right now. I would like to hear your perspective, both of you, a little bit more about whether the list would be a short list or a long list, some pros and cons. In my view, I think it would be better to have quite a restrictive list in order to make sure that it's effective, but maybe that would also be harder to gather the support for. So that's the fine balance. But to hear some of your perspective on that would be interesting.
Thank you very much. Yes, then I will give the floor to you, Nicholas, please.
Fantastic. So thank you very much for those questions. I'll try and take them in turn. So in terms of a timeline, it will not happen tomorrow. I think that's quite clear. I think there would need to be, in my personal opinion, is if we're going to do an EU-wide positive list, which I highly support, it needs to be done right. And it needs to be objective, and it needs to have the right people who are developing the list. And so I think there's two phases. There would be the phase of developing the committees that we use to develop the list itself. Then there's the phase of developing the list properly. And after that, then I believe some form of transition period is needed, but not a really extensive time. I mean, we also, the health issues, the invasive alien species issues are happening right now. So we do need to act as quickly as possible. But it is on the scale of several years from now. I would say three years at a conservative, maybe a little longer. So that's why we have to act now. And I totally agree with your comment that we need to get this started as soon as possible. Your second question about controversies. Of course, yes, I really do want to stress that the people who keep exotic pets love their animals. They really do love their animals. And they get benefits from their animals as well, just as I get benefit from my cat. Other people do get benefits. But the question is that a two-way relationship in terms of the benefits? And for many species of exotic pet, that's not the case. And so, yes, it's very difficult to convince people that currently keep their pets that they can't continue to do so. But the grandfather clause is a very important clause in most of these positive lists, because it means that if people can demonstrate that they legally purchased their animal before the law comes in, they can keep that animal until the end of its natural life. So we would never rip people's pets away from them. In fact, we wouldn't have the rescue capacity to do that. But yes, there certainly is some controversy, but in fact, in several member states, for example, in Belgium, the longer that the list is in place, the more accepting people become of it. And in fact, you end up getting a social pressure against the keeping of exotic pets. So it flips around as well. But we can't hide away from the fact that people will struggle with the idea at first, I think. Although let's also be clear that, as I showed in the poll, the general public are against the idea of keeping exotic pets. So I think the next question was your question. So thank you very much for your comment on momentum. Totally agree. Let's do this now. And you mentioned, would it be a short list versus a long list, and what might be the pros and cons of that? As we saw in the social economic report, I'd really recommend reading that when it comes out. It's quite technical, but it is very, very interesting. Both the long list and the short list do have benefits. So a long list would be far better than the current situation. There's also the ability to add and remove species from the list. So if a trader doesn't agree with the list, the burden of proof is now on them to demonstrate that this species can be kept by everyday people in reasonable conditions, and that the animal is actually suitable for that. So there's two possible ways to go about this. You could start with a very restrictive list, and then one by one, some species, I don't think it would be many, some species may be added. And the other approach, which I would also support, but I prefer the short list, as you say, you could have a longer list that is reduced as we get more and more evidence in place that demonstrates, hey, these animals are very actually difficult to keep. And just to use this opportunity to make one more statement, is that because an animal is on the positive list, that does not mean it is an easy animal to keep, right? Dogs and cats are not easy animals to keep. But if you have, there's plenty of animals that are on a positive list that if everybody just suddenly went out and bought them, it would not be good for those animals. So, but what a shorter list of species allows is proper guidelines to be developed for those species that are allowed in trade. A centrified place where you can go for guidelines, proper husbandry requirements. There's lots of extras that you can add to a positive list framework. And I think that's the key, is that the positive list is the initial framework, and we build around, extra complementary measures to really help with that in the future. So sorry, I haven't answered your question directly, but there are pros and cons to both.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. Mr. Carpenter, would you like to come in? If so, you're welcome to do so.
Yes, thank you. And you're right, Niels, there was national controversies, and we see that in the survey and the responses as well, that if you're in the pet trade, you are averse to regulations. But I think what we see in a lot of the responses is an if-then. If there is going to be regulation on the keeping of pets, they would prefer that it's at the EU level rather than at the national level. That it's hard for their business if their competitors in other countries have different policies, and kind of tired of people coming into the shop saying, oh, I can't get that, fine, I'll go across the border to Germany. And actually there was an example of a pet shop that operates across 3 different positive lists, and they told us that internally in their company, they've developed their own positive list so that they can move their products freely between their businesses, because it's quite difficult if they need to keep track of products saying, oh no, we can't sell that feed in this country, but we can in another. Just briefly on the short versus long, that's kind of looking at all species together, but another dynamic that maybe parliamentarians should be thinking about is which animal classes would be included as well. As I said, for the existing positive lists, we mostly see it for mammals and a bit for reptiles. Potentially that's another decision, is which animal classes will be included originally, which ones will be added in the future.
Thank you both very much. There are a couple of more questions. Actually, we have 5 minutes left, so maybe very quick, and then we'll have a quick answers.
I hurry up, sorry for my delay. Germany is one of the member states with the highest amount of exotic pets. In our hedgehog event last week, we learned it, for example, the African white hedgehog, and on the other side, maybe frogs from the rainforest. And there's a lot of pressure in favor of a negative list. Can you explain us in a simple term what is exactly the difference between negative and positive list?
Thank you, Sebastian. Manuela?
Very quickly, because we don't have much time. I mean, it's a while that we're discussing the positive list also in the last legislation. And breeders come to me, for example, breeders who breed exotic fish in Europe. And they say that this positive list could hamper their, let's say, business, but because they say we're not harming biodiversity in third countries, we are helping to save biodiversity, and we have this exotic fish in Europe. Would this apply also to them, this positive list? And they also argue that regarding fish, there's so many species, so it would be rather a very long positive list. If you can say some things about that. Thank you very much.
Great. Very quick answer, Nicholas, please.
Brilliant. Quick answer on something I could talk about all day. Thanks. Negative lists. Negative lists are reactionary. So what does that mean? It means when they discover a problem, in the species, let's say there's a population decline in a very rare species, we go, that's a problem. We need to add it to a negative list. That's a very long and cumbersome process to add something even to a negative list, and sometimes it can be too late. If the species has already become an invasive species, and then you add it to the negative list, that population can already be established in our native habitats and environments. So that reactionary part of a negative list is a huge downfall. And the positive list is the opposite of that. It's a proactive approach, a precautionary approach. So, for example, if a new species is discovered, if you have a positive list, it is automatically not allowed to be traded. And this is a huge problem right now, because under negative list scenarios, new species are discovered, and suddenly people are desperate to get their hands on that exclusive species. And you know, if it's a newly discovered species, well, probably there's not many of them in the wild. So that's just a very quick answer to that. The other thing with negative lists is they can be confusing. Okay, I think I'll stop there. That's enough for the negative list.
Because we only have 3 minutes or 2 minutes left.
Totally.
I don't know if Manuela's question, if you have it.
Yes, I do. So it was about breeders. There's 2 points I want to make here. First of all, regarding fish, there are some countries that are considering a fish positive list, but there is also a reason that we don't have fish positive lists in place at the moment. Perhaps for certain classes, as Griffin was saying, perhaps for certain classes at the moment, maybe we don't have the evidence that's required for a positive list of all the classes, which means that in the meantime, other tools can be used. So I don't foresee a fish positive list coming anytime soon. What should be done is it should be written into law that every few years, the other classes that don't have a positive list yet should be re-looked into, so that we have the opportunity to develop a positive list when the evidence is in place. And just one last thing on breeders, sorry. When we talk about positive list, let's be very clear as well, there are experts out there. There are people that can breed animals and keep animals in a way that is conducive to their natural behaviors, but it's very, very difficult. It's even difficult for zoos. But under the positive list scenarios, there are licensing possibilities for people who can actively demonstrate that they have the time, the means, the money, the equipment to be able to do this. And this is also an argument that zoos sometimes require proper expert keepers to be able to actually interchange animals with them. And that would be able to remain under a positive list.
Thank you. Griffin, I don't know if you have, if we have 1 minute, we might lose translation, I'm afraid, but if you want to come in very shortly, I'm afraid, then you're welcome to do so.
Maybe just one quick point on negative list versus positive list. So the very basics, to be clear, a positive list is a list of species saying this is what can be kept, and a negative list is a list of species saying this is what cannot be kept. So Nick's given the reasons kind of why negative list is against the precautionary principle, but that's the very basic of the two different approaches. Some member states have gone one direction over the other. There's a bit more momentum, and for good reason, towards positive lists.
Thank you very much to our two speakers, Griffin Carpenter and Nicholas Clark. I think it's been a very interesting discussion, and we have a chance to do something about this right now with the dogs and cats proposal, so I think we should get to work. Thank you for the discussion here today. Next time, Thursday, the 19th of December, we will actually discuss the Commission's proposal on protection of dogs and cats and their traceability. So here we might also continue the discussion on how we can improve this situation and establish a positive list. Many thanks for the attendance today and for the interesting debate. Thanks. A final call from Sebastian, yeah?
Absolutely final call. Today is the last day for co-signing the written questions to the Commission concerning the potential downgrade for wolves. Please sign today or never.
Thank you. I've signed.